Take a look at the device you're on right now. Your phone, your laptop, your desktop, it feels solid, a single object. But inside, at its heart, beats a tiny, intricate engine made of silicon and dreams. We call it a processor, a CPU, and the story of that little engine is not just a story about technology. It's a sweeping epic of ambition, of bitter rivalries, of scrappy underdogs who dared to challenge giants, and of visionary artists who decided to build their own universe from scratch. Our story begins not at the beginning of computing, but at a moment of dramatic upheaval, a moment that sent shockwaves through the entire industry. For decades, the world of personal computing had marched to the beat of a single drum, the x86 architecture, dominated by Intel. Most computers, including Apple's own iconic Macs, ran on their chips. It was the established order. But in November 2020, Apple decided to change the tune. They announced they were breaking away, forging their own path, and introduced the world to a chip they called the M1. This wasn't just a new processor, it was a declaration of independence. Built on a cutting-edge 5nm processor scale so small you could fit millions of its components on the head of a pin, the M1 was a complete rethinking of what a computer chip could be. At its heart was an 8-core CPU. Now, you've probably heard of cores before, but Apple did something clever here. They didn't make all 8 cores the same. Instead, they created a team. Imagine a construction crew. You have 4 immensely powerful workers, the high-performance cores, ready to lift the heaviest beams and do the most demanding work, like editing a 4K video or compiling complex code. But you don't need that raw power all the time. For just checking your email or browsing the web, using those titans would be a massive waste of energy. So Apple added 4 high-efficiency cores to the team. These were the nimble, energy-sipping workers who handled the everyday tasks quietly and without draining your battery. A smart traffic controller inside the chip, called a performance controller, would intelligently assign tasks to the right core at the right time. The result, blazing fast performance when you needed it, and incredible battery life when you didn't. Your laptop could finally be both a beast and a marathon runner. But the M1's genius didn't stop there. In a traditional computer, the CPU, the GPU, the graphics processor, and the memory are all separate components, living in different parts of the motherboard. They have to constantly send data back and forth, like messengers running across a city. This creates delays or latency. Apple's solution was the unified memory architecture. Imagine instead of a sprawling city, you have a single high-tech campus. The CPU, the GPU, and the 16-core neural engine, a specialized brain for artificial intelligence tasks, all live in the same complex and have access to the same central pool of high-speed memory. There are no messengers, no long journeys. Everyone has immediate access to the same information. This dramatically sped everything up. Suddenly, graphics-intensive tasks felt smoother, AI-powered features became instantaneous, and the whole system felt impossibly responsive. It was a masterpiece of integration. The industry took notice. This quiet, cool-running chip in a slim MacBook Air was outperforming bulky, fan-whirring laptops powered by the competition's best offerings. It was a paradigm shift, and Apple was just getting started. This was the first shot in a revolution they planned to lead. In 2021, they expanded the family with the M1 Pro and M1 Max. If the M1 was a highly skilled special ops team, the M1 Pro was an entire platoon. It scaled up the concept, offering up to 10 CPU cores and a formidable 16 GPU cores. For video editors, 3D artists, and musicians working with dozens of tracks, this was a dream come true. The unified memory was boosted to 32 gigabytes, allowing them to work with massive files without breaking a sweat. The M1 Max was something else entirely. It took the same powerful 10-core CPU, but then doubled down on graphics, pushing the GPU core count to a staggering 32. It supported up to 64 gigabytes of unified memory. This wasn't just a chip, it was a portable creative studio. It was designed for the kind of high-end visual effects and 3D rendering that, until then, had required a dedicated desk-side tower. Apple was systematically dismantling the old rules of performance and portability. The culmination of this first, audacious generation arrived in 2022 with the M1 Ultra. Its creation was a stroke of engineering brilliance that was almost audacious in its simplicity. Apple designed the M1 Max with a hidden, high-speed interconnect they called Ultra Fusion. Then, they simply took two M1 Max chips and fused them together. The result was a single, monstrous processor that behaved as one. The numbers were mind-boggling: a 20-core CPU, a 64-core GPU, and support for up to 128 GB of unified memory. It was the pinnacle of the M1 family, a chip that delivered workstation-class power and redefined what was possible in a compact desktop form factor. The M1 family wasn't just a product line, it was a statement. Apple was no longer a customer of the old guard. It was a leader with a new vision for the future of the personal computer. Success, as they say, breeds ambition. Having redrawn the map with the M1 family, Apple didn't rest. In mid-2022, they unveiled the second act, the M2, built on an even more refined 5nm process. The M2 wasn't a radical reinvention, but a significant evolution. It's like a champion athlete returning for their second season fitter, faster, and smarter. The 8-core CPU architecture remained, but the individual cores were clocked higher, meaning they could think and execute instructions more quickly. The real leap, however, came in graphics, with the M2 offering up to 10 GPU cores. This delivered a tangible boost for casual gaming and creative apps. More subtly, but just as importantly, Apple increased the memory bandwidth. Think of bandwidth as the width of a highway. The M1 had a wide highway, but the M2 made it even wider, allowing more data to travel between the processors and the unified memory at once. This, combined with an increased memory ceiling of 24 GB on the base chip, meant the M2 could handle more complex tasks and larger projects with even greater ease. It was a refinement that made a great experience even better. Of course, the Pro and Max versions weren't far behind. In early 2023, the M2 Pro and M2 Max arrived. Following the established playbook of more, the M2 Pro pushed the boundaries with up to 12 CPU cores and 19 GPU cores, backed by 32 GB of memory. This was tailored for the professionals who were pushing the limits of the first-generation decoders, photographers, and producers whose workflows were becoming ever more demanding. The M2 Max, once again, was for the creators at the bleeding edge. It shared the 12-core CPU, but blew the doors off graphically, with up to 38 GPU cores and a colossal 96 GB of memory support. For filmmakers working with 8K footage or architects rendering complex virtual buildings, the M2 Max offered a level of fluid performance that was simply unprecedented in a laptop. And then came the Titan, the M2 Ultra. In mid-2023, Apple once again used its Ultra Fusion technology to stitch together two M2 Max chips. The result was the new king of Apple Silicon, a 24-core CPU powerhouse with up to 76 GPU cores and a staggering 192 GB of unified memory. This chip wasn't just for professionals, it was for the vanguard of the industry, the people working on next-generation scientific research, Hollywood-level visual effects, and massive data analysis. It set a new benchmark, proving that Apple's integrated, scalable architecture had a truly astonishing amount of headroom. But technology waits for no one, not even Apple. Just as the world was getting acquainted with the power of the M2 family, a new frontier was breached. In late 2023, the M3 family debuted, and this was a monumental leap. The M3 marked Apple's transition to 3nm technology. This move to a smaller, more advanced manufacturing process is the holy grail of chip design. It allows you to pack in more transistors, which are the fundamental building blocks of a processor, into the same amount of space. More transistors mean more power, but because they're smaller and more efficient, they do it while using less electricity. This translates directly to faster performance and even longer battery life, the best of both worlds. The base M3 kept the 8-core CPU, but made those cores fundamentally more powerful. But the big news was the new 10-core GPU. For the first time ever on a Mac, it supported hardware-accelerated ray tracing. Ray tracing is a sophisticated graphics technique that simulates how light behaves in the real world, creating incredibly realistic shadows, reflections, and lighting. It's the secret sauce behind the stunning visuals in modern video games and animated films. By building this capability directly into the chip's hardware, the M3 could render these complex scenes with a level of speed and efficiency that was previously impossible on a laptop of its class. The M3 Pro and M3 Max continued this trajectory. The M3 Pro refined its CPU balance, offering up to 12 cores split evenly between performance and efficiency, paired with an 18-core GPU and up to 36 GB of memory. The M3 Max, however, was an absolute beast aimed squarely at the most demanding users. It featured up to a 16-core CPU, with a strong bias towards high-performance cores, a massive 40-core GPU, and support for up to 128 GB of memory. Interestingly, Apple chose not to release an M3 Ultra. Perhaps they felt the M3 Max was so powerful it already covered the needs of all but a tiny fraction of users, or perhaps they were already looking ahead to the next big thing. That next big thing arrived in May 2024 with the M4. Built on an even more advanced second-generation 3nm process, the M4 was all about efficiency and intelligence. It featured up to 10 CPU cores and a 10-core GPU with even better ray tracing performance. But its standout feature was the neural engine. Apple supercharged it, enabling it to perform incredible 38 trillion operations per second. This wasn't just about making Sierra faster. This was a clear signal that Apple saw the future of computing as being intrinsically linked with artificial intelligence. This neural engine was designed to power on-device AI, from real-time language translation and advanced photo editing to intelligent features woven deep into the operating system. Later that year, the M4 Pro and M4 Max arrived to flesh out the family. The Pro model scaled to 14 CPU cores and 20 GPU cores with up to 64 GB of memory. At the absolute peak sat the M4 Max, with up to 16 CPU cores, 40 GPU cores, and 128 GB of memory. It solidified its position as the ultimate chip for portable professional power. Through these 4 generations, in just 4 short years, Apple had completely reshaped the landscape. They had created a family of chips that were not only powerful, but incredibly efficient, all built around a unified architecture that delivered a user experience of unparalleled smoothness and responsiveness. But to understand just how revolutionary this was, we need to rewind the clock and look at the giant whose world Apple had just turned upside down. Long before the sleek aluminum unibodies of MacBooks, long before the M-series chips, computing was a wild and tame frontier. And in this frontier, one name rose above all others to lay the very foundations of the personal computer age: Intel. Their story begins in 1971 with a chip that seems almost comically primitive by today's standards, the 4-bit 4004. It was originally designed for a calculator, but it was much more than that. It was the world's first commercially available microprocessor, a general-purpose brain on a single sliver of silicon. It was the spark. It proved that complex logic could be condensed onto a tiny chip, a concept that would quite literally change the world. The truly pivotal moment, the one that would echo through the decades, came in 1978 with the 16-bit 8086 processor. This chip introduced the x86 instruction set. Think of an instruction set as the fundamental language a processor speaks. The x86 language, with its specific commands and syntax, would become the lingua franca of the entire personal computing industry for over 40 years. IBM chose its successor for their first PC, and the rest is history. An entire ecosystem of software and hardware grew up around this language, creating an empire. But the innovation that truly unlocked the modern computing experience arrived in 1985 with the legendary 80386. This was the first 32-bit x86 processor, a major leap in computational power. But its most revolutionary feature was something called protected mode. Before the 386, computers could really only do one thing at a time in a stable way. If a program crashed, it could bring down the whole system. Protected mode was like building virtual walls inside the processor's memory. It allowed the computer to run multiple programs at once, each in its own protected space. If one program failed, the others would keep running. This was the bedrock of true multitasking. It's the reason you can write an email, listen to music, and have a web browser open all at the same time. Without the 386 and its protected mode, the graphical user interfaces of Windows and Mac OS as we know them would not have been possible. Intel didn't just build chips, they built the stage upon which the entire drama of modern computing would unfold. As the market matured, Intel realized that one size doesn't fit all. They ingeniously structured their processor lineup into a clear hierarchy, a ladder of performance that consumers could easily understand. At the very bottom were the Celeron chips. These were the no-frills, budget-friendly engines designed for the most basic of tasks: browsing the web, writing a school report, managing emails. They were the reliable sedans of the computing world. A small step up was the Pentium series, offering a bit more horsepower for smoother video streaming and light multitasking, the dependable family minivan. Then you get to the main event, the Core family. The Core i3 is the entry point, the perfect engine for an everyday laptop. It's for the student, the home user, the person who needs a responsive machine for daily productivity and a bit of light entertainment. The Core i5 is the undisputed workhorse of the lineup. It's the sweet spot, the perfect balance of price and performance. For mainstream gamers, aspiring content creators, and professionals who need a capable machine that won't break the bank, the Core i5 has long been the default choice. Moving up the ladder, we find the Core i7. This is where things get serious. With more cores, higher clock speeds, and more advanced features, the i7 is built for high-performance demands. This is the chip for the dedicated gamer who wants high frame rates, the 3D artist rendering complex models, and the videographer editing 4K video. It's the sports car of the family. Finally, at the absolute apex, sits the Core i9. This is Intel's flagship, a chip built with zero compromises for the enthusiast and the professional who demand the absolute maximum power. This is for the Hollywood editor cutting an 8,000 feature film, the scientist running complex simulations, the streamer gaming and broadcasting in pristine quality simultaneously. Beyond this consumer-facing lineup, Intel built specialized architectures for different worlds. For the backbone of the internet, for the massive data centers and scientific workstations, they created the Xeon line. Xeon processors are the unsung heroes of our connected world. They prioritize reliability, scalability, and specialized features like error-correcting memory, which is crucial when even a single flipped bit can corrupt massive datasets. The Atom series, on the other hand, was designed for the opposite end of the spectrum, low-power mobile devices where battery life was the most critical factor. More recently, as graphics AI have become increasingly important, Intel has invested heavily in its Xe architecture, a unified approach that powers both the integrated graphics in its core processors and its standalone ARC graphics cards, signaling its intent to compete fiercely in every corner of the market. For decades, this carefully tiered empire was the undisputed center of the PC universe. But empires can be challenged. For many years, AMD, Intel's main rival, was seen as the budget alternative. They competed on price, often offering good enough performance for less money. But in the mid-2010s, they were struggling. The company seemed to have lost its competitive edge. Then in 2017, everything changed. AMD launched a new architecture they called Zen, and with it, the Ryzen 1000 series of processors. It was one of the greatest comeback stories in the history of technology. The Zen architecture was a complete overhaul, a radical new design. And its strategy was simple but devastatingly effective: cores. At a time when Intel's mainstream consumer chips typically topped out at 4 cores, AMD's Ryzen brought 6, and even 8, cores to the mainstream desktop at incredibly competitive prices. For content creators, programmers, and anyone whose work involved heavy multitasking, this was a revelation. Suddenly, you could get workstation-level multi-threaded performance for the price of a mid-range Intel chip. The first generation was a shock to the system. The 2018 follow-up, Zen plus Ryzen 2000 series, was a refinement. It offered higher clock speeds and ironed out some of the early kinks, making a good product even better. But the true earthquake came in 2019 with Zen 2 and the Ryzen 3000 series. This is where AMD truly took the lead. They moved to an advanced 7nm process, beating Intel to the punch. And they introduced a revolutionary chiplet design. Instead of designing one large, monolithic chip, which is expensive and difficult to manufacture, AMD built their CPUs using smaller, specialized chiplets. This modular approach allowed them to mix and match components, dramatically improving manufacturing yields and making it economically viable to offer an unprecedented number of cores. With Zen 2, AMD brought a 16-core processor to the consumer desktop, a feat that was previously reserved for the ultra-expensive high-end desktop market. The one area where Intel still held a slight edge was in single-threaded performance, which was critical for gaming. But in 2020, with Zen 3 Ryzen 5000 series, AMD closed that gap and, in many cases, surpassed Intel. They redesigned the core layout to significantly reduce latency, making their chips incredibly responsive. For the first time in over a decade, AMD unequivocally held the gaming performance crown. The innovation didn't stop. In 2022, Zen for Ryzen 7000 series arrived, bringing with it support for the latest technologies like DDR5 memory and PCIe 5.0, future-proofing the platform. They also introduced their X3D variants, which featured a groundbreaking technology called 3D V-Cache. They literally stacked a huge amount of extra cache memory directly on top of the processor cores. For gaming, which is extremely sensitive to memory latency, this was like giving the CPU a supercharger. These X3D chips became widely recognized as the fastest gaming CPUs on the planet. The most recent generation, Zen 5 Ryzen 9000 series, which landed in mid-2020 on an even more advanced 4nm process, continued to push the envelope, delivering another significant boost in raw performance and efficiency. Much like Intel, AMD structured its lineup for clarity. The Ryzen 3 is for entry-level systems. The Ryzen 5 is the mainstream champion for gaming and productivity. The Ryzen 7 is the high-performance choice for serious gamers and content creators. And the Ryzen 9 sits at the top, offering the highest core counts for professionals with the most demanding workloads. For the absolute titans of industry, AMD resurrected its Threadripper line. These processors are in a class of their own, offering up to 96 cores for high-end workstations, dwarfing anything in the consumer space. And recognizing the need for budget-friendly systems, AMD continued to produce APUs, or accelerated processing units. These clever chips combine Ryzen CPU cores with powerful integrated Radeon graphics on a single die, providing a fantastic all-in-one solution for systems without a dedicated, expensive graphics card. From thin and light laptops to powerhouse gaming rigs and professional workstations, AMD had come back from the brink to build a diverse and fiercely competitive portfolio. The history of technology is often told as a two-horse race, but the truth is always more interesting. In the shadows of the giants, there were other, smaller players who left their own indelible marks. One of the most notable was Cyrix. In the late 1980s and 1990s, Cyrix was the quintessential underdog. They started out by making math coprocessors, specialized chips that helped CPUs with complex floating-point calculations, and their products were often faster than Intel's own. In 1992, they entered the CPU market directly with the CX486S LC and DLC. Their strategy was brilliant. These weren't just new chips. They were designed as drop-in upgrades for older 386 systems. A user could literally pull the old Intel 386 chip out of their motherboard and plug the new Cyrix 486 chip in, getting a massive performance boost without having to buy a whole new computer. This focus on providing a cost-effective upgrade path earned them a loyal following. Their 5x86 chip was engineered to bring Pentium-like integer performance to the vast installed base of 486 motherboards. But their most famous product was the 6x86, a true competitor to Intel's Pentium. It excelled in the kind of integer-based tasks common in business applications and office software, often outperforming the Pentium at a lower price. Its Achilles heel, however, was its weaker floating point performance, which meant it struggled in the emerging world of 3D gaming. Cyrix also pioneered one of the first system-on-a-chip designs with their Mediax line, which integrated the CPU, graphics, and audio onto a single piece of silicon. This was a visionary move that powered a generation of budget PCs. Though the brand eventually faded after being acquired by VIA Technologies, Cyrix's legacy is one of clever engineering and making computing more accessible to the masses. The 1990s were also a fascinating time of architectural diversity, a battleground of ideas where the dominance of x86 was not yet a foregone conclusion. There were other paths, other philosophies. Digital Equipment Corporation's Alpha was a 64-bit RISC-reduced instruction set computer processor that was, for a time, the fastest chip in the world. It was an engineering marvel, but it struggled to gain mainstream software support and ultimately faded. Then there was the PowerPC, born from an unlikely alliance between Apple, IBM, and Motorola. This RISC architecture powered Apple's Macintosh computers for over a decade. It was a powerful and elegant design, but by the mid-2000s it was struggling to keep pace with the thermal efficiency and raw performance of Intel's roadmap, leading to Apple's historic transition to x86 in 2005, a move that makes their later transition away from Intel with the M1 all the more ironic. Other challengers flickered brightly but briefly. Transmeta, with its innovative code morphing software, promised incredible power efficiency but couldn't deliver the performance to match. Sun Microsystem's Spark architecture was a giant in the high-end workstation and server market, while MIPS Technologies created the RISC design that powered iconic machines like Silicon Graphics workstations and the original PlayStation console. These weren't failures, they were essential parts of the ecosystem, pushing boundaries and exploring alternative futures for computing. But not all ambitious projects succeed. Our story must also include a cautionary tale, a monument to hubris and one of the most significant and costly failures in the history of the industry, Itanium. Launched in 2001, Itanium was a joint project between Intel and HP that was supposed to be the future. It wasn't just an evolution, it was a revolution. It was designed to replace not only the 32-bit x86 architecture, but also a host of proprietary RISC architectures like Spark and PA RISC. Its core philosophy was called EPIC, or explicitly parallel instruction computing. In a traditional processor, a lot of complex circuitry is dedicated to figuring out which instructions can be run at the same time. EPIC's grand idea was to shift this heavy lifting from the processor to the software compiler. The compiler would analyze the code and bundle the instructions together in parallel, effectively spoon-feeding the processor exactly what it needed to do. In theory, this would lead to a simpler, more efficient, and massively powerful chip. But theory and reality are often two different things. Itanium was plagued by problems from the start. It was incredibly difficult to create compilers that could effectively use the EPIC architecture. The chips were expensive to manufacture, and the project suffered from repeated delays. Its biggest flaw, however, was its poor backward compatibility with the vast universe of existing x86 software. While it could run older software through emulation, the performance was terrible. They were asking the world to abandon its entire software library and start over. Meanwhile, a funny thing happened. AMD introduced a 64-bit extension to the good old x86 architecture. It was a brilliant, pragmatic move. It offered a smooth, seamless upgrade path to 64-bit computing without sacrificing compatibility with the millions of 32-bit applications people relied on. Intel was forced to follow suit, and the rapid advancement of this newly christened x86 to 64 architecture quickly made Itanium's revolutionary promises seem irrelevant. The world chose evolution over revolution. After billions of dollars and years of effort, Intel officially discontinued the Itanium line in 2021. It serves as a powerful lesson that technological purity and revolutionary ideas are worthless without a practical path for adoption. So here we are, standing in the present, looking back at this incredible saga. It's a story of constant change, of empires rising and falling, of underdogs having their day, and of brilliant ideas that reshape our world. From the foundational commands of the 8086 to the mind-bending integration of the M4, the journey has been one of relentless innovation. What's the lesson in all of this? For me, it's that progress is never a straight line. It's a messy, competitive, and beautiful dance between revolutionary leaps and steady, incremental improvements. Apple's M series showed us the power of integration and starting with a clean slate. AMD's Zen showed us that a determined challenger can rise from the ashes to topple a king. And Intel's long legacy reminds us that building the foundation, the standard that everyone else builds upon, creates an empire that can endure for generations. Even the failures, like Itanium, teach us valuable lessons about the importance of pragmatism and understanding the world you're retrying to change. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the secret history of the digital age. I hope it's given you a new appreciation for the incredible technology that shapes our lives.